Hi, I'm Ellie. Thanks for joining me today. There is a figure in Irish mythology who didn't bother with things, petty things like forgiveness. She circled overhead above the world like a big, black, vulturous kind of a bird, whispering death into the ears of kings. She was called the Morrigan, a female god, the ultimate warrior. The Morrigan didn't care for things like apology. She chose who would rise and who would bleed. Does that sound a little bit familiar to you? Because it does to me. Today, we don't need a battlefield or a sword. One misstep, one wrong word, and the crowd descends upon us. It might happen in the workplace, at the dinner table, maybe at Christmas time, for example, or even in a secret place behind closed doors where whispers happen without you, about you, or in your name. And these days, warriors are everywhere. They are invisible. They have no face, no location that can be found, especially with VPN, no confirmed identity, but they are still warriors. They're in for the kill, perhaps even more dangerous than they ever were, now that public judgment has gone digital, right? So here's the real question. Are we calling out injustice? Is this a normal, natural human thing that is just a sign of sadness and maybe our own sense of inadequacy that we're projecting onto others? Or are we like the Morrigan, feeding our insatiable hunger to punish others, looking for blood, intentionally trying to cause destruction? Welcome to the modern age of reckoning. And before we begin, ask yourself, have you ever been sentenced by the whispers of other people in another room that you didn't even see coming? Or worse still, have you ever been the whisperer setting up a guillotine against your unsuspecting victim? Who was the Morrigan? Well, long before cities were created, before empires and churches and parliaments or anything of a modern nature, Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, was ruled by the gods. Not the all-seeing, all-loving gods that you read about, in Sunday school. These gods were forged by weapons that were made from sunlight. And they healed wounds with music. And they whispered truth through stones in the ground. They were called the Tuatha de Danann, a race of mystical beings. And some say they were gods. Some say they were fallen angels, which sounds a little Enoch-y, doesn't it? Like the Book of Enoch. The fallen angels. But anyway, they arrived in a mist and they brought sacred treasures to the land. And they didn't really come here to negotiate. They defeated the old rulers of Ireland and they claimed the land for themselves. But their power couldn't last. The mortals rose in the end and the kings changed. And when the Tuatha de Danann were no longer welcome, they didn't die. What happens was they went underground. They went into the hills, into the mountains, and they became those curious voices and visions that many of us can only ever see and meet in our dreams. But not all of them faded quietly. One of them took on the shape of war. She became the primal scream of every battle that's just about to begin. She became the omen inside the blood of each of us. And her name was the Morrigan. Because, of course, undeniably, when we get down to the bare bones of it, of course, the ultimate warrior was a woman. Of course it was. And this is the story of the Morrigan's prophecy, the prophecy from the ultimate warrior. At the time of her prophecy, the Tuatha still ruled Ireland. They hadn't vanished into the hills, at least not yet. They were still strong, still sovereign. But a threat loomed just around the corner, one that they couldn't afford to ignore. The Fomorians were a neighbouring race of brutal beings. They were tied to chaos and destruction, and they were preparing for war. The murmurs of war began to happen, and the Tuatha were bracing themselves for battle. But before the battle had even begun, their warrior princess, the Morrigan, she stepped forward. She wasn't pleading for peace. She wasn't negotiating. She wasn't offering any kind of strategy to either side. She was announcing what was going to happen next. She delivered a prophecy, a stark, unforgiving prophecy. She said, and I quote, "I shall never see a world that will be dear to me. Every summer and every spring will be marked by the battle of kings. There shall be no end until all are demised. She wasn't being poetic by stating these words. She was using psychological weaponry. Her words didn't just predict violence, they kind of activated the violence by putting the fear of never-ending war until the very last breath of life is gone out there from both sides, basically. That's what she was predicting, that everybody would die. Well, when the warriors heard the Morrigan's words, they kind of braced for their own blood to be shed. Not because they wanted war, but because she'd instilled fear in them before any kind of blood had been drawn. Her greatest power as a warrior was to shape the perception of others. The Morrigan didn't ask the warriors to act bravely. She told them that they'd either rise or fall. And when they marched into battle, her prophecy followed them like a dark shadow. The moment of battle, which was spoken while Tuatha still held control of the land, is like a mirror of how we live today. It's a mirror that shows how fear and pressure and public judgment have always been used to command and control the behavior of people. And it shows how a king can be defeated before he's been on the throne long enough to even warm it up. Think about how many things have happened over recent years due to people's perceptions and how those perceptions have been shaped by things that were told by other people. We don't know what's true and what's false, but we decide what's true based on our perceptions that are controlled by other people. Often we're being fed our perceptions because they're kind of convenient to an agenda, and we really haven't got a clue. The Morrigan prophecy is an example of how a single warrior can begin and end a war with a single prediction. The prediction itself creates the illusion of the end of the story. And everything else that happens is created by the perceptions that were fueled by that illusion. So the Morrigan used prophecy to plant fear. Not just fear of death, but fear of humiliation and failure and betrayal, before the very first blow of battle was even struck. Today, we don't have a prophetic goddess standing by a river waiting to wage war against the enemy, although we do have a few goddess-like people out there, and especially goddess-like egos, especially these days. So I guess, we do have that, but we also have something else that's eerily similar to the Morrigan and her prophecy. We have whisper networks, people who whisper in dark corners or behind closed doors. We have online forums, and generally they're closed to a certain group that all have the same, kind of philosophy on life. Or they might be intolerant to opposing viewpoints. We have closed-door meetings in the workplace or vague memos or something like that. And one of the things, just from my own personal experiences, one of the things that has kept me up at night in the past when I was working in central government, especially as I got higher and higher and closer to the centre, well, the passive-aggressive emails used to always be going around. There'd always be something. Some supposed good doer, I guess, at least they would appear to have that image, but they were actually a wolf in sheep's clothing, for example. They were always injecting toxins into the workplace with their dangerously worded passive-aggressive emails, and it was infuriating and terrifying at times. And this is the real kind of stress that happens as people rise in the ranks at work. The higher up you get, yes, the salary gets higher, but the stress gets higher too. And it's because of the passive aggression and the competition and the Morrigan prophecies that are happening all around you. The cutthroats out to get you. They're much sneakier, they're much cleverer, and they're far more ruthless the higher up you go. And they generally fool people as well. They inflict damage and carnage all over the office. But these are all places where modern judgments are taking place every day. At home, in family, at the dinner table, online, behind closed doors, in the workplace, in your email inbox, all over the place. And often it's happening unfairly. It's not based on anything real. It's just perceptions being controlled by an outside force. Or is it? I don't know. That's the whole thing. Are we being controlled? And are we right to judge or not? Just like the Morrigan, these signals create pressure for us. They're kind of like a warning, a threat, a story about who's dangerous, who's flawed, and who might not belong to whatever group it is that they're supposed to belong to. These forces don't swing physically, any kind of physical sword, but they're still really deadly weapons, and I guess they do carry a kind of a sword in a way, because they shape perceptions. They cut the perception to the exact shape that they want it to be, as though they're yielding a sword. And they do it before the truth is even consciously being applied to those who are being controlled. One whisper can change your reputation. One meeting behind your back can decide your future. And one post online can change you from being a respected individual into being a rejected individual. And the strange part, well, most of us never even hear the prophecy is coming until we're already losing that battle. Because that's what perception is all about. Perception controls it. It's a prophecy of the future. It's a prophecy that predicts the future and fulfills the future just as predicted, by shaping the perceptions of people who will then pounce onto the intended target and deliver the prophecy just as foretold. The modern world and our digital age didn't invent judgment, but it has kind of amplified it. And just like the Morrigan, it rarely stops to ask boring questions like, I don't know, like, is this justified, for example? Or is it just my insatiable hunger for blood? The warriors of today are faceless. Their weapons are stories and storytelling and words. Their battleground is everywhere that we try to belong. Nobody is safe. Nowhere is safe. It's all a big battleground of warriors. So in this myth, the Morrigan doesn't lift a sword. She lifts a story, a vision, a threat, and a prophecy. And the warriors act not because they have facts at their disposal, but they act out of perception. In today's world, public perception works exactly the same way. It can shape careers, reputations, and legacies long before the full story emerges. I've actually found, just like that, 7 examples to show you. And it was really easy to find. I actually, if I'd spent, I don't know, a half a day looking, I could have found 100 more examples to share with you. But I'm going to share 7 to show you just how often this Morrigan prophecy delivers itself in today's world. The stories I'm going to share are of people whose reputations and outcomes were shaped by the Morrigan prophecy. And I think you're going to recognize most of these people, possibly even all of these people. So let's go to example number 1. And example number 1 is Ellen DeGeneres. You know, the comedian talk show host. Her brand was built on kindness, but stories from backstage painted a very much darker picture. Producers were dismissed. The show was rebranded. She was labelled a bully. Ellen ended up quitting show business completely and moving to the English countryside, where she raises animals, I think, with her wife. Some people called this result necessary accountability for the bully, but other people called it disproportionate punishment. What do you think? Did the world expose real harm in the case of Ellen DeGeneres, or did we just decide somebody was too happy for too long, so we had to put an end to it? Leave a comment, because I'd like to know what you think, and it's good to share these things. The second example is J.K. Rowling, the queen of storytelling, you know, the author of the Harry Potter series. Just a heroine in so many people's eyes. Well, so J.K. Rowling made some statements on gender identity a couple of years ago, I think, that sparked global controversy. Critics accused her of harming trans communities. Supporters defended her right to speak from personal conviction. What do you think? Are we protecting people from harm in the case of J.K. Rowling, or are we punishing someone for thinking out loud? Example number 3. Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein. This is really topical at the moment, right? And don't ask me who he is, because honestly, you'd have to be living on the other side in the spiritual world to not know who Epstein is, right? But after he was convicted of sex offences years ago, Bill Gates still met with him multiple times. Yes, it was definitely an error in judgment. Don't get me wrong. And he's admitted regret. He says that he was still continuing to garner donations from Epstein for his variety of charities that he supports around the world, or that he manages around the world. But when it comes to the public, well, the court of public opinion hasn't let go, and Bill Gates' wife even divorced him over his association with Epstein. So the question is, does a poor choice of company equal guilt? Or have we just stopped believing in the nuances of life? So just because someone is a convicted sex offender, does that mean that you can't ask them for donations anymore? Or are you guilty by association? Example number 4 is Bon Appetit magazine. Right. There was a photo that was taken a little while ago of the editor-in-chief of Bon Appetit, who was wearing a racially offensive costume. That single photo exposed his racial bias. The editor-in-chief ultimately stepped down from the magazine. The controversy also resulted in kind of this weird little shift in power. A greater number of writers of colour suddenly found new visibility on this platform. Some people interpret this as being an act of justice, a necessary kind of bonfire of the vanity style of reversal of fortune. Other people consider it to be an overcorrection of the circumstances. So what do you think? Did we fix a broken system over there at Bon Appetit, or did we just change the rules about who's allowed to speak? Example number 5 is Adam Smith versus Chick-fil-A. Yum, good chicken. In 2012, Adam Smith filmed himself at Chick-fil-A at a drive-through protesting the company's anti-LGBTQ stance by berating a pretty polite employee while accepting a free cup of water. Okay, the video of Adam Smith at Chick-fil-A went viral, and within a few days, Adam Smith, who was then a CFO, he lost his job, he faced widespread backlash, and he struggled for years to rebuild his life. So that was a single video protest. There was no violence, it was just words. He lost his job, he lost his future opportunities for jobs, and he lost his financial security. The crowd ultimately moved on, but he didn't. He's kind of still struggling. So the question is, when does judgment of Adam Smith go from being a justifiable judgment to becoming an unjustifiable lifelong sentence? Where in that point does it happen? Example number 6, Joy Reid. Right. Joy Reid, who was a host, kind of like a news host or news opinion host on MSNBC until just recently. Well, a few old blog posts kind of surfaced a few years ago from Joy Reid's old social media account. They were posts that many people found homophobic and offensive. She said that her account had been hacked, but then she also apologized for the incident. And she also said that she'd grown as a person since then. Now, when it was first discovered, MSNBC kept her on, and she rose to pretty high level of fame. She had a primetime-ish kind of spot. I don't know if it was exactly prime time or an hour before prime time, but she was in that category. So she did very well after MSNBC heard about these old posts. But then years later in 2025, the controversy kind of unexpectedly raised its head. It was resurrected in a surprise interview that she did with Piers Morgan, the British guy. She was taken by surprise in that interview, and so her defences were a bit raw, and this sparked fresh backlash from the public. And so MSNBC ultimately sacked her, even though they'd already known about this incident on her social media for years. But you know, the stench of battle can kind of get contagious, so it was time for her to go. And it's actually also a little bit ironic because Piers Morgan himself was apparently afraid to go back to Britain for quite a long time. I'm going back on the memory of what I had when I was living in Britain. But he was afraid to go back to the UK, apparently, based on his connection to a rather massive scandal about ethics and phone hacking that involved a victim of crime. And so it's not really like he's squeaky clean in this scenario either. And so for those who aren't aware of what I'm referring to, one of the most infamous cases in the UK took place when I was living there a few years ago, and it related to a phone hacking scandal involving the voicemail of a young missing teenager called Millie Dowler, who was later discovered to have been found murdered. Well, journalists from a number of different newspapers were found to have accessed her phone messages during the police investigation unlawfully and certainly unethically, which gave police and Millie Dowler's family false hope that she might still be alive because she was missing, her phone was signalling as though it was being used, and someone was checking her messages, and so they thought she's still alive. This may have actually had, a correlation towards whether or not she could have been saved. Piers Morgan at the time was the editor of the Daily Mirror newspaper. The Mirror was not directly implicated in the Millie Dowler case, but the broader scandal definitely reached it. The broader scandal revealed that the phone hacking kind of behaviour was widespread across multiple tabloids, including the Daily Mirror. There was a High Court judgment that took place that found that Piers Morgan had known that journalists at his paper were intercepting voicemails in order to get stories. So they were doing the same thing that journalists had been doing to Millie Dowler, albeit maybe to other people, other victims. So Piers Morgan was asked by the court to return to Britain to give evidence either directly to the court or to an inquiry, I think it was. But boy, he had a lot of excuses. It seems he was living in America at the time, and he appears to have been too chicken to return to the UK to get his reckoning. And so he didn't do so for a long time, potentially years. So it's kind of interesting that he put the screws on Joy Reid, right? But he did, because that's the thing about the Morrigan prophecy. The good guy can be the bad guy, can be the good guy, can be the bad guy, can be the good guy, with just a few well-placed words. The power of words. So my question is, when it comes to Joy Reid getting fired, getting sacked from MSNBC finally for her sins, is this a lesson in accountability? Or is it proof that dirt from the past will never, ever, ever, ever truly wash clean? And then my final example is Andrew Cuomo. I think he was governor of New York until, I don't know, maybe around 2020, something like that. He ultimately resigned after multiple sexual harassment allegations. Charges were dropped, ultimately, and I don't think there were any convictions. But now he's back and he's running for New York City mayor. Some say he deserves a second chance, but others say the damage is already done. So the question is, are we witnessing redemption? Or are we just witnessing a powerful man who's refusing to stay gone? I'm really interested to know what you think about these people. They are all examples of the Morrigan prophecy playing out in the modern day. What side do you fall on? So these are not fantasy stories. These are today's prophecies, and they're passed through headlines and tweets and whispered group chats. They shape our fears, our alliances, and our sense of what's right and what's wrong. And just like in the Morrigan's world of battle, the consequences come whether you're ready or not. If you're on the receiving end of this, then you are already dead from battle before the battle has even physically begun. And if you aren't sure that you believe me, just ask Joe Biden. So you've heard the stories, the rise and the ruin, the applause and the exile. Each example began with a perception, a whisper, a photo, a blog post, or a name. And once the signal was sent, the warriors gathered, not with swords, but with narratives. And so here's the reckoning part of today's show. When someone crosses a line, do we call them out to create damage or to create change? Are we really creating change, or are we feeding our hunger to punish them? Are we warriors for good, or are we warriors for blood? And when someone apologizes, do we offer grace and forgiveness, or do we just tighten the grip of exile against them? Do we demand accountability, or do we demand obedience? And who gets to decide when redemption has been earned? These are the questions that don't have easy answers, in my view. But, we ask them of people all the time. We do it at work, we do it in families, we do it at the dinner table, we do it online with every thread and every post and every comment and every online debate. Because judgment today is delivered just like the Morrigan's prophecy. It's delivered before the facts are clear and before the battle begins. And before the target even knows they're going to be targeted. So ask yourself some questions. Have you ever sentenced somebody without knowing the whole story? Have you ever clapped when someone fell? Not because of justice, but because you were just satisfied at their demise. Oh, we got him. Choose your side. Are you on the side of mercy, or are you on the side of reckoning? Do you want justice? Do you want forgiveness, or do you just want blood? And have you ever been standing unaware and blind in the middle of someone else's prophecy. Welcome to the new world. This is Ellie Dreams Down Under. I love knowing you're here, and I'll see you in my dreams.